Here's the uncomfortable truth most people ignore. The 1950s did not just create science fiction. It exposed how terrified humanity really was. These films were not harmless entertainment. They were warnings disguised as stories. Fear of invasion, fear of replacement, fear that we were no longer in control. And the most disturbing part is this. Decades later, those same fears have not disappeared. They have only become more believable. Number 15. Earth versus the Spider, 1958. It starts the way so many 1950s nightmares begin, with something lurking just out of sight. A missing man, a quiet cave, and a discovery no one was prepared for. When teenagers Mike and Carol stumble upon a massive cavern while searching for Mike's father, they don't just find him, they find something far worse. A giant spider, dormant but very much alive, waiting in the shadows like a ticking bomb. What makes this film fascinating isn't just the oversized creature. It's how it reflects a very specific fear of the time. The idea that science and radiation had gone too far. That nature itself was beginning to fight back. When the spider eventually makes its way into town, the chaos feels raw and immediate. There's no grand alien invasion fleet here. Just one unstoppable force tearing through everyday life. And then comes the moment that sticks. Teenagers trapped in a high school gymnasium. The spider closing in. The pounding drums used to disorient it. It's bizarre. It's creative. And it perfectly captures the experimental energy of 1950s sci-fi. Looking back, Earth versus the Spider may seem simple, but that simplicity is exactly what gives it power. It takes a basic fear and stretches it to terrifying proportions. In an era obsessed with the unknown, this film reminds us that sometimes the real horror isn't from space. It's already here, just waiting to wake up. Number 14. The Cosmic Man, 1959. Imagine this. A glowing white sphere appears silently above a quiet California canyon. No explosion, no warning, just a presence. Watching, waiting, and no one quite knows whether it's a visitor or a threat. The Cosmic Man plays things very differently from the loud invasion stories of its time. Instead of destruction, it leans into mystery. When scientists and military officials arrive to investigate the hovering object, tension builds not through action, but through uncertainty. What is this thing? Why is it here? And most importantly, what does it want? Then the film shifts. A translucent figure emerges, calm, almost gentle, and suddenly the narrative changes from fear to curiosity. This isn't a monster, it's a messenger. A being that chooses to observe humanity rather than dominate it. Its quiet interactions, especially with a disabled boy named Ken, become the emotional core of the story. There's a powerful contrast at play here. While the alien shows restraint and compassion, the humans respond with suspicion and aggression. Guns are drawn, orders are given, and you can feel the Cold War mindset creeping into every decision. By the time the film reaches its conclusion, it leaves behind something rare for the genre. Not spectacle, not destruction, but reflection. The Cosmic Man asks a simple question that still resonates. What if the real danger isn't the visitor from the stars, but the way we choose to respond to it? Number 13. The Mysterians, 1957. The film wastes no time easing you in. It begins with destruction, violent, sudden, unexplained. Near Mount Fuji, entire landscapes are ripped apart by forces no one can see. At first, it feels like a natural disaster. But then the truth surfaces. This is something far more deliberate. When the Mysterians finally reveal themselves, the tone shifts from confusion to confrontation. These are not mindless invaders. They are organized, intelligent, and disturbingly reasonable in their demands. They want land, they want resources, and most unsettling of all, they want human women to rebuild their species. What follows is not just a battle. It's a negotiation that spirals into war. Scientists step forward. Military forces mobilize. And suddenly the fate of humanity rests on a line between diplomacy and destruction. The Mysterians aren't portrayed as monsters in the traditional sense. They are desperate survivors of a dying world. That nuance gives the conflict an edge that many films of the era lack. Visually, the film is unforgettable. Massive domed alien structures rise from the ground. Futuristic weapons tear through human defenses. There's a scale here that feels ambitious, even by today's standards. And behind it all, you can sense Japan's post-war anxieties shaping every frame. By the end, the Mysterians leaves you with a lingering discomfort, not because of what the aliens did, but because of how close their motives feel to our own. Number 12. The 27th Day, 1957. No explosions, no cities in ruins, no towering machines descending from the sky. Instead, the 27th day opens with something far quieter. A question. 5 ordinary people from different parts of the world are taken aboard an alien craft. No violence, no panic, just confusion. They are each given a small box and a simple instruction. Inside it lies a weapon powerful enough to destroy entire populations. And the rules are clear. It can only be used on those unlike themselves. Then they are sent back. What follows is not a story about aliens. It's a story about us. Governments scramble to understand the situation. Leaders panic behind closed doors. The media spreads fear faster than facts. And these 5 individuals are left carrying a burden no human should ever have. The tension doesn't come from action. It comes from restraint, from watching people wrestle with the choice of whether to use unimaginable power. Every conversation feels loaded. Every silence feels dangerous. Because at any moment, one decision could end everything. And that's what makes this film stand out. It strips away spectacle and replaces it with moral pressure. The alien presence fades into the background, leaving humanity alone with its own instincts. By the time the final moments arrive, there's no grand victory, just a quiet realization. The greatest threat was never the visitors from the stars. It was the test they left behind. Number 11, Invasion of the Saucermen, 1957. Let's change the angle for a moment. Forget scientists. Forget generals. This time, the story belongs to teenagers. Late-night drives, empty roads, that familiar stretch of countryside where nothing ever happens, until suddenly it does. It begins with a mistake. A car swerves in the dark. A figure appears out of nowhere, and in a split second, they hit something that should not exist. What follows is a strange mix of panic, disbelief, and something almost absurd, because the invaders in this film aren't towering monsters or unstoppable machines. They're small, odd, almost ridiculous to look at, until they start moving. The genius of this film lies in its tone. It doesn't lean fully into horror. It doesn't commit to comedy either. Instead, it walks a strange middle ground where the bizarre becomes unsettling. Severed alien hands still twitch. Creatures inject victims with alcohol. Authorities dismiss everything as nonsense, and the truth slips further out of reach. There's also a subtle layer beneath the chaos, a quiet commentary on how easily real danger can be ignored when it doesn't fit expectations. The adults don't listen. The system doesn't react, and the threat grows in the background, unnoticed. Invasion of the Saucermen feels like a late-night story someone tells you half-seriously. You laugh at first, then you pause, and somewhere in that pause, the unease begins to settle in. Number 10, Not of This Earth, 1957. Now shift into something colder, more controlled, more deliberate. This is not a story driven by chaos. This is precision, calculation, a slow and methodical intrusion that barely raises its voice. The film introduces us to a man known only as Mr. Johnson. Calm, expressionless, always hidden behind dark glasses. From the outside, he blends in perfectly. But the longer you watch, the clearer it becomes. He doesn't belong here. There are no dramatic entrances, no flying saucers crashing into cities. Instead, the horror unfolds in quiet spaces, conversations that feel slightly off, actions that don't quite match human behavior. And beneath it all, a disturbing purpose begins to take shape. He is harvesting blood, not out of cruelty, but necessity. His world is dying, and Earth has what it needs. What makes this film effective is its restraint. It doesn't overwhelm you with spectacle. It pulls you in slowly, building tension through atmosphere rather than action. Close-up shots linger just a little too long. Silence stretches just a little too far. And Mr. Johnson remains at the center of it all, watching, waiting, adapting. There's an almost clinical feel to the invasion. No emotion, no hesitation, just a task that must be completed. By the end, the question isn't whether humanity can stop him. It's whether they even realized what was happening in the first place. Number 9. I Married a Monster. From Outer Space, 1958. This one does not begin with destruction. It begins with love. A wedding night. A quiet road. A man stepping out into the darkness for just a moment, and coming back changed. At first, nothing seems wrong. The marriage continues. Life moves forward. But then, the cracks begin to show. Subtle, almost invisible. A lack of warmth. A missing spark. Conversations that feel hollow. And slowly, the realization starts to form. The man she married is no longer the man she knew. What makes this film powerful is how deeply personal the invasion becomes. There are no armies landing, no cities burning. The threat slips into homes, into relationships, into trust itself. Women in the town begin to notice the same pattern. Husbands who feel distant, emotionless, replaced. And then the truth surfaces. These are not men anymore. They are vessels, controlled, replicated, part of a larger plan to infiltrate humanity from within. The horror here is psychological. It attacks identity. It turns intimacy into suspicion. Every glance feels uncertain. Every touch feels wrong. And the fear isn't just about survival. It's about losing the person closest to you without even realizing when it happened. By the time the confrontation arrives, the film has already done its damage. Because it leaves you with a question that lingers long after the screen fades. If the people we trust the most can be replaced, how would we ever know? Number 8. This Island Earth, 1955. Now the scale explodes. What begins as a simple scientific curiosity quickly spirals into something far beyond Earth itself. Strange electronic components arrive without explanation. A device is assembled, and suddenly, communication is established, not with another country, but with another world. Dr. Cal Meacham thinks he's being recruited for a research project, something elite, something important, and he's right, just not in the way he expected. Because the moment that connection is made, the film shifts from grounded science fiction into full interplanetary spectacle. He is taken, along with other brilliant minds, transported to a distant planet on the brink of collapse, a world torn apart by war, desperation, and a race against extinction. Metaluna is not just a setting, it's a warning, a glimpse of what happens when technology outpaces control. When conflict consumes everything, the skies burn, the surface cracks, and survival becomes a fleeting illusion. Visually, the film is relentless. Strange alien designs, explosive energy weapons, creatures that feel both fascinating and deeply unsettling. But beneath the spectacle, there's something heavier driving it all. A quiet message about responsibility, about the cost of progress, about how easily advanced civilizations can destroy themselves. And as the characters fight to escape, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The future they are witnessing might not be as distant as it seems. Number 7 Plan. 9 from Outer Space, 1959. Let's be honest. This film does not creep in quietly. It crashes through the door with ambition so big it almost collapses under its own weight. But that is exactly why it refuses to be forgotten. The premise is wild. Aliens arrive not to conquer, but to stop humanity from destroying itself. Their solution is as strange as it is unforgettable. Raise the dead, turn graveyards into battlegrounds, force the living to face something they cannot control. And then the execution begins. Flying saucers glide through the sky like fragile illusions. Tombstones shift where they stand. Dialogue lands with a stiffness that feels almost surreal. But beneath all of this, something unexpected happens. The film becomes hypnotic. not because it is polished, but because it is fearless. You can feel the determination behind every frame. Director Ed Wood pushing forward despite limitations, building a world out of whatever he had available. There is no restraint here, no second guessing, just pure commitment to an idea that refuses to stay small. And that is where the power lies. Because Plan 9 is not remembered for perfection. It is remembered for impact, for becoming something larger than itself. A film that audiences return to not for what it lacks, but for what it dares to attempt. In a decade filled with polished studio productions, this one stands apart. Not as the best, but as the one you can never ignore. Number 6. The Blob, 1958. It begins with a streak across the sky. A falling star, harmless, beautiful. The kind of thing people step outside to admire. And then it lands. Inside that meteorite is something alive. Not a creature with eyes or limbs. Not something you can reason with or fight in the usual way. Just a mass. Silent. Growing. Consuming everything it touches without hesitation. What makes the Blob so effective is its simplicity. There is no complicated backstory. No grand explanation. The threat exists, and it expands. That is all you need to know. But the real tension comes from something else entirely. No one believes it. Teenagers witness the horror first. They try to warn the town. They try to explain what they saw. And every time, they are dismissed, ignored, treated like they are exaggerating or imagining things. Meanwhile, the creature grows stronger, larger, closer. Scene by scene, the panic escalates. A doctor's office becomes a trap. A movie theater turns into chaos. People run, but there is nowhere to hide, because this is not something you can outrun. It spreads. It adapts. It devours. And then comes the realization. This is not an invasion you can negotiate with, not something you can scare away. It does not think. It does not feel. It simply consumes. By the final moments, the solution feels temporary, almost fragile, because deep down, one question remains. What happens when it starts moving again? Number 5. It came from outer space. 1953. The desert is quiet. Too quiet. Wide open skies. Endless sand. A place where nothing ever changes, until something tears through the night and crashes straight into it. John Putnam sees it first. A streak of fire carving across the darkness. A moment so brief it almost feels unreal. But when he reaches the impact site, there's no doubt left. This was not a meteor. This was a vessel. And then it disappears. No explosion. No debris. Just a perfectly smooth crater. And the unsettling sense that whatever arrived is no longer inside it. What follows is a slow unraveling of reality. People begin to vanish. Then they return. Familiar faces with unfamiliar eyes. Voices that sound right but feel wrong. The town doesn't erupt into chaos. It sinks into suspicion. Who is still human? Who isn't? The brilliance of this film lies in its restraint. The aliens are not driven by conquest. They are stranded, observing, adapting. And for a brief moment, the story forces you to see things from their perspective. They are not villains. They are survivors, trying to escape a hostile world. But that understanding doesn't make the situation any less dangerous, because fear spreads faster than truth. And once the town turns against itself, the real threat is no longer what came from the sky, but what begins to happen between the people left behind. Number 4. Invaders from Mars, 1953. This one begins in the most vulnerable place imaginable, a child's bedroom. Young David looks out his window one night and sees something impossible, a glowing object descending slowly behind the hill near his home. It doesn't explode. It doesn't make a sound. It simply sinks into the earth, as if it was always meant to be there. He tells his parents. They don't believe him, until his father goes out to investigate and comes back different. That's when the nightmare truly begins. The film doesn't rely on spectacle. It builds dread through transformation. One by one, the people around David begin to change. Their expressions flatten. Their warmth disappears. And most disturbing of all, they all carry the same mark on the back of their neck. Control. Silent. Invisible. Absolute. Authority figures fall first. Police, scientists, even his own family. And suddenly, the world David knew becomes unrecognizable. There is no one left to trust. No one left to help. Just a growing realization that something beneath the ground is pulling the strings. The story moves like a fever dream. Strange tunnels, hidden chambers, a force that never fully reveals itself, yet controls everything. And at the center of it all is a child trying to convince a world that refuses to listen. Because sometimes the most terrifying idea is not invasion. It's the possibility that it has already happened. Number 3. The Thing from Another World. 1951. There are no flashing lights in the sky this time. No dramatic descent. Just ice. Endless, suffocating ice. The story begins in isolation. A remote Arctic research station where the outside world already feels distant. Cut off. Vulnerable. And then the signal comes in. A craft has gone down somewhere in the frozen wasteland. A team is sent out to investigate, expecting wreckage, but what they find is something far more unsettling. A shape buried beneath the ice. Not mechanical, not familiar. Alive. They bring it back. That decision changes everything. Inside the station, the tension builds with ruthless efficiency. Doors close, windows frost over. And slowly, the realization spreads that this is not just a discovery. It is a threat that cannot be contained. The creature does not negotiate. It does not hesitate. It feeds. It grows stronger with every encounter. What makes this film hit harder is its pace. There is no time to breathe. No time to fully understand what they are dealing with. The characters are forced to react, to survive, to make impossible choices in an environment where escape is not an option. And beneath the surface, there is something else. A quiet fear that science has crossed a line it cannot uncross. That curiosity itself has opened a door that should have remained sealed. By the time the final confrontation unfolds, one truth becomes undeniable. The real horror was never finding it. It was bringing it inside. Number 2. The War of the Worlds. 1953. It starts with curiosity. A bright object falling from the sky into a quiet town. People gather. They watch. They speculate. Some even treat it like a spectacle. Then the hatch opens, and everything changes. What follows is not a slow invasion. It is immediate, overwhelming, merciless. The first attempt at communication ends in seconds. A heat ray cuts through the crowd without warning, and just like that, the illusion of control is gone. This film does not build toward chaos. It detonates into it. Martian war machines rise from the ground like nightmares given form. Sleek, untouchable, shielded by forces humanity cannot break. Military responses feel insignificant. Weapons fail. Strategies collapse. And one by one, cities fall. But what truly gives the film its weight is not just the destruction. It is the helplessness. The sense that no matter how advanced humanity believes itself to be, it is still fragile, still vulnerable to something far beyond its understanding. There are moments that linger long after the spectacle fades. Churches filled with people praying for survival. Scientists searching for answers that never come. Entire populations on the move, fleeing something they cannot outrun. And through it all, one question echoes. What happens when the world we built is no longer ours? Number 1. The Day the Earth Stood Still. 1951. There are invasions that arrive with noise and destruction. And then there are arrivals like this. Calm, precise, and far more unsettling. A flying saucer lands in Washington, D.C. Not in secrecy, not in darkness. In broad daylight, in front of the entire world. There is no panic at first, only curiosity. A visitor steps out, composed, unarmed, speaking not as an enemy, but as a messenger. His name is Klaatu. What follows is not a battle. It is a confrontation of a different kind. Klaatu does not threaten immediately. He observes. He studies humanity as if weighing its worth. and standing behind him is Gort, silent, motionless, a machine capable of absolute destruction if provoked. The tension in this film does not come from chaos, it comes from restraint, from the uneasy feeling that at any moment, one mistake could trigger something irreversible. When Klaatu is shot by frightened soldiers, that tension snaps, not into war, but into a demonstration of power so controlled it becomes terrifying. Electricity across the planet stops. For a brief moment, humanity is forced to experience its own fragility. And that is where the film reveals its true purpose. This is not a story about aliens invading Earth. It is about humanity being judged, measured against its own violence, its own inability to coexist. Klaatu's message is simple, but devastating. Change, or face consequences beyond comprehension. Even now, the idea lingers. What if we were never the most advanced presence watching this planet? And what if the warning was never truly meant for the past, but for us? These films were never just about aliens or flying saucers. They were reflections of fear that still exists today. Fear of losing control, fear of the unknown, and maybe something even deeper. If these stories taught us anything, it is this: the greatest threat was never out there. It was always within us.